My wife walked into the tournament wearing another man's jersey. She had no idea I was there. I was standing beside our bed with my wife's phone in my hand when the life I thought I had stopped being real. The messages were not vague, flirtatious, or open to interpretation. There were explicit photographs, plans for secret meetings, and long declarations of desire between Natalie and Grant, the writer she had repeatedly described as nothing more than her professional partner. One message fixed itself in my mind. I can't wait for one more night before you have to go home. Home meant me. Home meant the marriage we had built over 12 years. I saved screenshots of everything, moving carefully enough that my hands looked steadier than I felt, then returned the phone to the exact position where I had found it on the nightstand. Natalie was in San Francisco and would not be home for 3 more days. That gave me time. My anger was real, but it did not come out as shouting or broken furniture. It settled into something cold and deliberate. Calling immediately would give her time to deny, minimize, delete evidence, or make my reaction the issue. I refused. My name is Ethan Cole. Less than a year earlier, I had been a Denver fire captain married to a successful photographer, living what seemed like an enviable life. By the time this story truly began, I was living near Flathead Lake in Montana, teaching wilderness survival to tourists and answering to no one. The distance between those lives began with that phone, and the knowledge that my wife had been returning from another man's bed. Natalie and I had met during a warehouse fire in downtown Denver. She was working for the Denver Chronicle and had moved dangerously close to a weakening exterior wall while trying to get photographs. I pulled her back seconds before part of the structure collapsed where she had been standing. After the fire, she asked for my number, claiming she wanted to interview me for a human interest piece. 3 months later, we were engaged. For the next decade, we seemed solid. I moved up through the fire department, and she slowly built a name for herself as a photographer. We traveled, hiked the Rockies, and discussed children, though someday never arrived. 2 years before I found the messages, Natalie secured a contract with National Geographic. That night, she showed me the email and said, "This changes everything, Ethan." She was right, although neither of us understood how. The first assignments were manageable. She spent a week photographing wildlife in Yellowstone, 10 days documenting glaciers in Alaska, then came home energized and eager to reconnect. Later, the trips became longer. 2 weeks in Costa Rica, 3 weeks in Kenya following conservationists, and other assignments that kept her away for increasing stretches of time. Whenever I questioned the distance, she said photography could not be rushed. "You can't schedule the perfect shot," she would say. I understood the importance of timing. In firefighting, timing advance, retreat, or change tactics could decide who lived. I adapted, built routines around her absences, and treated the strain as the cost of supporting her. Then she accepted the San Francisco assignment. The project was supposed to last 6 months and document urban renewal across the Bay Area, which meant Natalie would travel there almost every week. That was when Grant Mercer entered our marriage, though I did not recognize it yet. "He's the writer assigned to the series," Natalie told me after the first trip. "He used to work for the New Yorker." I noticed how her eyes brightened and her cheeks colored at his name, but said nothing. Observation had always been part of my job, and I stored the detail away. After that, Grant appeared in conversation constantly. Grant thought her composition was revolutionary. Grant believed the series could win an award. Grant had shown her a remarkable place in Chinatown. She added, "Strictly professional," even when I had not asked. I was not a jealous man. Firefighters survive by trusting the people beside them, and I had brought that same assumption into my marriage. I kept trusting her through private calls, scheduled intimacy, and the strange energy she brought home from San Francisco. The trust ended at 2 in the morning when a preview appeared on her phone. "I can still taste you on my lips." I lay awake beside her, studying a familiar face that now belonged to a stranger. The next morning, she prepared for another flight as usual. I kissed her goodbye because I wanted her to leave without suspicion. "I love you," she said casually. "Travel safely," I answered, while mentally arranging my departure. As soon as the airline showed that her plane had taken off, I began moving. I transferred exactly half our joint funds, leaving no question that I had taken only my share. I packed one duffel bag with clothing, documents, my grandfather's watch, and only the essentials I could carry. Then I called my fire chief and resigned, citing a personal emergency. Leaving the career I had built should have felt impossible, but I needed a complete break more than rank or security. I left a note for my brother Derek, a former Marine and the only person I trusted not to demand answers. It said, "I need to disappear for a while. I'm safe. I'll contact you when I can." Then I drove northwest with no destination beyond getting far enough away that Natalie could not reach me through habit, guilt, or argument. I left no dramatic letter, identified no messages, and never called Grant. My absence was the confrontation. Over 11 months, isolation stripped away my identities as husband, captain, and dependable problem solver. Living simply and working with my hands revealed what remained without those titles. I reached Kalispell when my truck broke down, and I could not afford to continue. I worked briefly at a sporting goods store, then joined an upscale lodge where wealthy guests paid for authentic wilderness experiences. Brooke, the owner, hired me after seeing my survival skills and hearing a limited version of my firefighting background. These technology executives will spend $2,000 for a weekend learning to make fire without matches, she told me. You're capable, you don't talk too much, and you stay calm. When can you begin? Brooke was attractive, practical, and self-assured. She occasionally flirted but respected my boundaries. After I declined dinner, she studied me and said, whoever she was, she did serious damage. I asked whether it was that obvious. You look like someone who survived an explosion and still checks himself for shrapnel, she replied. There's no hurry. Some injuries need time before you know what they took from you. I had time. I woke before sunrise, worked to exhaustion, spoke little, and let my beard grow. Daily labor rebuilt my body. At night, I journaled so I could examine my thoughts without advice or pity. I read about cold anger and choosing to leave destruction before it changed me. I examined ignored instincts, accepted excuses, and how my life had begun revolving around Natalie's ambitions. I learned the power of refusing to participate. I kept complete radio silence. I avoided social media, searches, and mutual friends. Only Derek had the number to my prepaid phone. We spoke about once a month. He later said Natalie had hired an investigator and visited him crying, claiming I vanished without explanation. She knows why I left, I said. Derek answered that he had told her only that I was alive. He refused to reveal anything else. When he asked whether I planned to return to Denver, I told him there was nothing there for me anymore. I did not explain the unexpected peace Montana gave me. At the lodge, I developed a reputation for being skilled, quiet, and dependable under pressure. Interested guests received a quiet refusal. For the first time in years, I built my days around my own direction. Losing the familiar restored an independence I had not known was missing. Winter came to Montana with hard temperatures and short days. The lodge grew quiet except for occasional guests who wanted ice fishing, snowshoeing, or the bragging rights of surviving a weekend outdoors. I split firewood, repaired equipment, led the few excursions that remained, and became comfortable with long periods of solitude. That changed on December 18th, the morning after the lodge staff's holiday gathering. I was checking in a family from Minnesota when the front door opened and a rush of freezing air entered the lobby. Natalie stood in the doorway with snow melting in her hair, a small suitcase in one hand, and uncertainty written across a face that looked thinner than I remembered. She wore a red wool coat I had never seen. For several seconds, the family at the counter seemed to fade, and my body reacted before my mind did, tightening as if a threat had entered the room. Natalie waited until the guests moved away, then approached and said only, "A room for one." There were no tears, no dramatic greeting, and no attempt to touch me. I could have refused service, ordered her out, or demanded to know how she had found me. Instead, I entered her information into the system, ran her credit card, and placed a key on the counter. Cabin 8. It's the last one on the left path. Breakfast begins at 7. My voice sounded calm enough to belong to someone else. Her fingertips brushed mine when she took the key. She hesitated and said, "You look good, Ethan." I gave her a small directional nod toward the cabins and nothing more. I held myself together until I reached the staff bathroom. Then my stomach turned, and I was sick once. A physical reaction to seeing the past standing inside the life I had built to escape it. Brooke found me at the sink, rinsing my face with cold water. She asked no long explanation. "That guest is the woman you ran from, isn't she?" I nodded. Brooke offered to claim the lodge was overbooked and make Natalie leave. I considered it briefly. "I've been avoiding this for almost a year," I said. "It may be time to face it directly." Brooke offered her apartment above the office if I needed space. That night, I could not sleep. I paced, wondering why Natalie had come and what she expected. At 3 in the morning, I walked to the edge of the frozen lake. Moonlight stretched across the ice, and the stars looked painfully sharp in the cold. I stayed until the cold cleared my thoughts. By dawn, I had made a decision. I would hear what she had come to say. I would answer what mattered, then continue my chosen life with or without closure. Natalie was already in the dining room when I arrived to make the morning coffee. She held a mug of tea, familiar enough to hurt, yet changed into a stranger. "You found me," I said from behind the counter. She admitted that it had taken longer than she expected, because I had disappeared thoroughly. She looked at my beard and added that it suited me. I asked why she was there. She inhaled slowly before answering. I didn't come to beg you to forgive me, and I didn't come to convince you to take me back. You deserved better than that. I told her what I had deserved was a wife who did not cheat. The words landed hard, but she did not defend herself. Yes, she said, you did. Her unqualified admission unsettled me more than an argument. She said she had returned from San Francisco to an empty house and a missing husband. For weeks, she had believed I might be injured or dead until Derek finally confirmed that I was alive. You knew why I left, I said. Natalie replied. I know now. I didn't know when I walked into the house. I laughed at the convenient distinction. I told her I had seen the messages, photographs, and plans. She closed her eyes and admitted that she had noticed her phone was slightly out of place that morning, but I had behaved so normally at the airport that she had not understood what it meant until she came home and found me gone. Guests began entering the dining room, so I ended the conversation before it became a public scene. I told her I would finish work at 3 and that cabin 14, which was closed for maintenance, would be empty. If she truly wanted to talk, she could meet me there. I spent the day splitting logs hard enough to keep my thoughts ordered. Cabin 14 smelled of pine cleaner and fresh paint. I started a fire to occupy my hands. She arrived at 3 in jeans and a sweater, her hair in the simple ponytail she wore before glossy assignments. I asked how she had located me. She asked whether it mattered. I told her to answer. She explained that I had used a credit card once for gasoline in Missoula the previous January. By the time the investigator traced the transaction, the trail had gone cold. Months later, Derek let slip that I was near Flathead Lake. Natalie began staying in different towns around the region and showing my photograph to people. Eventually, a waitress in Kalispell recognized me. One transaction and one careless detail had defeated nearly all my precautions. Part of me calculated another escape. Once she had explained how she found me, Natalie asked the question that had apparently brought her across several states. Why did you leave without confronting me? I asked what confrontation would have changed. She had been lying for months. She could have denied it, called it one mistake, blamed the distance, or promised anything to keep me. The evidence showed something more deliberate. It wasn't a single bad decision, was it? I asked. You chose it again and again. Natalie did not try to soften the answer. The affair had lasted 4 months. The number struck hard. For 4 months, she came home and slept beside me while protecting a second life. I asked whether she had loved Grant. She said she had believed she did. Calling it meaningful helped her excuse what was selfish and cheap. Now, she understood it had been neither love nor anything special. I told her not to turn herself into the victim of her own choices. Her voice became firmer. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm telling you what happened after you disappeared. Grant ended the relationship 2 weeks later because, in his words, everything had become too complicated. When rumors about the affair reached the magazine, the project was canceled because a photographer sleeping with her assigned writing partner created an obvious professional problem. 3 other contracts disappeared soon afterward. Unable to maintain our house alone, Natalie sold it. She spent months in therapy asking why she traded stability for something that vanished under pressure. I asked whether she expected sympathy. She said no. She said my disappearance forced self-confrontation that shouting never could. I had not threatened Grant, broken his property, humiliated her publicly, or stayed long enough for her to recast me as the dangerous husband. I had simply removed myself. That left her alone with the empty house, the collapsed affair, and the consequences of decisions no one else had made for her. For a while, only the fire spoke. Snow began falling beyond the windows. I told her that the man who had left Denver no longer existed. Seeing those messages had ended him. Natalie said she was not the same person either, then reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. She had written how the affair began, what followed, and what remained after the excitement. Read it or burn it, she said. That choice belongs to you. She planned to stay at the lodge for 3 days. Afterward, she would leave and accept permanent silence. Before walking out, she said, "For whatever it's worth, I have never regretted anything more." I watched the envelope for hours after she left. Eventually, I put it unopened into my jacket. Some truths required readiness. The next day, I arranged to lead an all-day snowshoeing trip for a group of corporate lawyers, partly because the physical work and responsibility for their safety kept me away from the lodge. By the time I returned, Brooke was waiting with a thermos of coffee mixed with whiskey. She told me Natalie had come looking for me, and that she had said I was out with guests. Then, with her usual bluntness, Brooke observed that my wife was beautiful and looked expensive. I said Natalie had not always seemed that way. "People change," Brooke replied. "Not always in a better direction." She asked nothing else, but later she compared what I was facing to a forest fire. Sometimes, a controlled burn cleared dead growth, so that new life could emerge. I told her it sounded like a carefully disguised argument that the confrontation might be useful. She only shrugged and said destruction occasionally served a purpose. That night, alone in my cabin, I finally opened Natalie's letter. It was 8 handwritten pages in writing I had once recognized from grocery lists, birthday cards, and notes left beside the coffee maker. Now it felt like a message from someone I had known in another lifetime. Natalie described the affair without pretending it had happened accidentally. It began after a late photography session when she and Grant remained together after the rest of the team left. His admiration made her feel valued in a way she had not realized she had begun craving. Attention became excitement. Excitement became secrecy. And secrecy became something she treated like an addiction. She divided her life into separate compartments and told herself that as long as I never discovered the truth, she could preserve both worlds. She wrote about Grant abandoning her as soon as my disappearance created consequences. The canceled project, the lost contracts, her parents' disappointment, the sale of the house, and the humiliation of realizing she had exchanged substance for illusion. The final paragraph affected me most. She wrote that she did not expect forgiveness and knew she had no right to request it. My silence, however, had been more powerful than rage, because it gave her no distraction. There was no screaming husband to blame, no enemy to resist, and no argument in which she could defend herself. There was only an empty home reflecting what her choices had cost. She said the experience broke her in ways she had needed to be broken, and ended with the hope that I would someday find happiness again. I read the letter 3 times. Then I went outside under the moon and split wood until my arms could no longer lift the axe. On the second day of Natalie's stay, I found her alone on the lodge's back deck despite the severe cold. She was wearing a borrowed parka that swallowed her narrow frame and staring across the frozen lake. I evaluated the situation, then deliberately sat in the chair beside hers. After a long silence, I told her I had read the letter. She nodded without looking at me. When she asked what I thought, I said only that it was what it was. She gave a small, sad smile and said, I had always been direct. I asked why she had traveled to Montana instead of calling. Natalie finally turned toward me. Would you have answered? I told her no. Then that is why I came. She had needed to see my face and know that I was truly alive. I admitted that I was not all right, but I was improving. She said I seemed stronger and more certain than before. I explained that losing everything had forced me to reduce life to its essentials. When a gust of wind drove loose snow across the deck, she shivered, and I advised her to go inside. Before I stood, she mentioned seeing a journal on my desk when she delivered the envelope. Years earlier, I had written short stories, but had gradually abandoned them as my responsibilities grew. She asked whether I had started writing again. I told her I was only organizing my thoughts. You should try, she said. You were good. I answered that there were many things I might try again, but some parts of life were not meant to be revisited. She understood that I was not talking about writing. As I turned toward the door, Natalie told me Derek missed me. I said my brother knew how to reach me. She replied that he had said exactly the same thing about me. I paused and told her I might visit in the spring. It was not a promise, but it was the first opening I had made toward any part of my former life. That night, I dreamed of fire, not the uncontrolled infernos I had fought in Denver, but a deliberate burn moving across dead ground, destructive only where destruction was necessary. I woke with an unfamiliar clarity. Natalie's presence had not restored the marriage, erased the betrayal, or made forgiveness easy. It had shown me that I could stand in the same room with my past without surrendering to it. I believed her final day would end with a quiet departure. Instead, a major snowstorm moved into the region. By noon, the lodge had lost its main electrical power. Emergency generators kept essential systems operating, and we instructed guests to remain in their cabins, where they had fireplaces, food, and emergency supplies. Brooke and I were distributing blankets when I realized I had not seen Natalie all morning. Her car was still in the parking lot, slowly disappearing beneath accumulating snow. One of the housekeepers remembered that Natalie had gone out early and mentioned wanting to see the North Trail before leaving. The trail covered roughly 5 miles through dense forest. In normal weather, it was beautiful. In a fast-moving winter storm, even experienced hikers could lose every familiar landmark. I asked how long she had been gone. The housekeeper estimated 4 or 5 hours. I was already reaching for my gear when Brooke told me not to go. Visibility had collapsed, the temperature was dropping, and a second missing person would only make the emergency worse. I told her Natalie did not know the terrain and could not survive indefinitely without proper equipment. I would carry the emergency radio, use GPS, and mark my coordinates every quarter mile. If I had not returned within 3 hours, Brooke was to contact search and rescue. She understood that arguing would not stop me, so she helped pack thermal blankets, first aid supplies, water, and other emergency equipment. While checking the radio, she said, "She must still matter to you." I answered that Natalie had been my wife for 12 years. That history did not disappear because the marriage was over. Brooke gripped my arm and warned that my instinct to rescue people might someday get me killed. I told her this was a calculated risk. I knew the forest, understood winter exposure, and had the necessary gear. The moment I stepped outside, the force of the storm made the decision feel less certain. Wind-driven snow struck every patch of exposed skin, and I could see barely 10 feet ahead. I lowered my goggles and followed the direction of the North Trail through drifts already rising toward my knees. Under ordinary conditions, I could have completed the route in less than 2 hours. In that storm, reaching the first mile marker took nearly 45 minutes. I called Natalie's name at intervals, but the wind tore the sound away. 2 miles in, I found a red scarf caught on a branch. It was the scarf she had been wearing at the lodge. That small piece of fabric confirmed that she had passed through and sharpened every part of my attention. If she had been exposed for several hours, hypothermia was no longer a possibility, but a likelihood. I continued while studying the snow for irregularities. About half a mile later, I found footprints leaving the trail, the kind of mistake a disoriented person makes while trying to locate shelter. The tracks led toward a cluster of large rocks that formed a natural windbreak. Against the stone, partly covered by blowing snow, I saw a huddled figure. Natalie's face was dangerously pale. Her lips had turned blue, and her entire body shook violently. She was conscious, but her words came slowly and without precision. "Ethan, how did you find me?" I told her I had tracked her, then wrapped her in an emergency thermal blanket. When I asked whether she could walk, she tried to stand and immediately collapsed. She could no longer feel her feet. "That's all right," I said. "I have you." I lifted her, secured her against my chest, and instructed her to keep speaking so I could monitor her consciousness. She muttered that she had been stupid and believed she would return before the storm arrived. I told her to stop reviewing mistakes and concentrate on staying awake. Carrying another person through deep snow demanded everything I had. Each step became a separate task, and the wind erased signs of the route almost as quickly as I found them. After what felt like hours, Natalie asked why I had come. Her voice was weak against my shoulder. "You could have let me disappear too." I tightened my grip and told her that was not who I was and never had been. She whispered that it was why she had loved me and why she still did. I did not answer. Responding to the confession mattered less than keeping us moving. When the lodge lights finally became visible through the whiteout, relief nearly weakened my legs. Brooke and 2 staff members ran outside, took Natalie from my arms, and carried her to the main fireplace. They removed her wet outer clothing, wrapped her in dry blankets, and began warming her gradually. I stayed near the doorway long enough to see that she was breathing and responsive. Her eyes met mine across the room, filled with gratitude, pain, and questions neither of us was ready to ask. Then I turned away because I needed space to understand what it meant that I had risked my life for her without pausing to consider whether she deserved it. Brooke found me later in the kitchen, still wearing snow-crusted gear and drinking coffee with both hands around the mug. She reported that the doctor expected Natalie to recover. There was no frostbite, and the hypothermia had remained moderate rather than progressing to the most dangerous stage. Brooke called my decision either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. I said it was probably both, but reminded her that I knew the terrain and had carried proper equipment. "That isn't what I meant," she replied. "You still care about her." I admitted the situation was complicated. Brooke said it always was, and told me Natalie had been moved to room 3 in the main lodge for the night. She was asking to see me. I sat alone after Brooke left, listening to the storm continue outside, and trying to decide whether entering that room would reopen a door I had spent months closing. Eventually, I knocked. Natalie was propped up in bed beneath several blankets, with color returning to her face and an intravenous line providing fluids. Her voice was stronger when she thanked me. "I would have died if you hadn't found me." I asked what she had been thinking when she entered the trail with a storm approaching. There was no accusation in the question. I genuinely needed to understand. She admitted she had not been thinking tactically. She wanted one final look at the place that had become my sanctuary and believed she had enough time. Natalie explained that the doctor had delayed her departure for at least 2 days. Then she hesitated and referred to what she had said while I carried her through the storm. I interrupted that hypothermia altered judgment and mental state. She met my eyes and said, "That doesn't make the words untrue. I still love you. I never stopped. But that is mine to live with, not yours." The confession created an emotional pressure I was not prepared to manage, so I stood and told her to rest. Before I reached the door, she said there was something she had deliberately left out of the letter because she wanted to tell me herself. Grant had contacted her the previous month after his latest relationship collapsed. He wanted to reconnect now that, in his view, enough time had passed. Natalie refused. She told him that their selfishness had destroyed her marriage and much of her career. Grant laughed and accused her of being dramatic. That response finally stripped away whatever illusion she had once attached to him. He still treated the damage as an inconvenience instead of a consequence. "That was when I knew I had to find you," she said. "Not because I believed I could win you back. I needed to tell you that leaving the way you did was the only thing that made me fully understand what I had done." I thanked her for telling me. She repeated that she was not asking for another chance and did not deserve one. She only wanted me to know that at least one of us now understood the cost. I nodded and left, closing the door behind me. The storm lasted 2 more days and kept everyone confined to the lodge. I focused on generator checks, guest safety, food distribution, and the practical problems created by the weather. Natalie and I saw each other mainly during meals. Our exchanges were polite and restrained, as if we were learning how to occupy the same building without pretending we still belonged to the same life. When the roads were finally cleared, I found her in the lobby with her suitcase packed while Brooke completed the bill. I told Natalie that the staff had dug out her car and that the tires should manage the roads. But the mountain passes remained icy, and she needed to drive slowly. She promised she would. Brooke moved away to give us privacy. Natalie asked whether I planned to stay in Montana. I said the life suited me for now. I asked what she would do. She was returning to Denver and had begun accepting assignments from smaller publications. The work did not carry the status of National Geographic, but it was honest, and she was rebuilding one job at a time. A new scarf was wrapped around her neck, because the red one remained somewhere on the North Trail. She said I knew where to find her if I ever wanted to speak, with no pressure and no expectation. I told her I understood. For several seconds, we stood inside 12 years of shared history without knowing how to reduce it to a goodbye. Then I made a decision that surprised even me. I took the first journal from my pocket and handed it to her. Natalie stared at the worn notebook and said she could not accept it. I told her I wanted her to have it. Her letter had shown me the inside of her collapse, and perhaps my journal would help her understand what her choices had done from the other side. Her fingers trembled as she took it. She thanked me, rose onto her toes, and kissed my cheek. The contact was a faint echo of an intimacy that had once been effortless. I neither returned it nor pulled away. "Be happy, Ethan," she whispered. "That is all I want for you now." I watched from the lodge steps as her car moved through the snow until the taillights disappeared around the mountain road. Brooke joined me and asked whether I was all right. "I'm getting there," I answered. And for the first time, the words felt accurate rather than defensive. Brooke observed that Natalie might return someday. I said she might, but I would not be waiting. That night, I opened a new journal and wrote that I had buried the past, not through forgiveness because I had not reached that point, but through clarity. Natalie and I had both been flawed in different ways. Now we were rebuilding in different places. For the moment, that had to be enough. 2 weeks later, my prepaid phone rang from a number I did not recognize. Derek's voice came through, unusually hesitant. He asked whether I was sitting down. My body tightened before he explained that Natalie had been involved in a head-on collision with a drunk driver on Interstate 25 outside Denver. She was alive, but her condition was critical, and she had already required multiple surgeries. For a moment, the room seemed to shift. Images arrived without permission. Natalie laughing in our kitchen, sleeping beside me before the betrayal, standing in the lodge with snow in her hair, and driving away after asking me to be happy. I demanded to know who had my location. Derek said no one else did, but Natalie's sister Vanessa had asked for my number because Natalie kept asking for me. I told him to give it to her. When Derek asked whether I was going back to Denver, I said I had not decided, even though I was already checking flight schedules from Kalispell. Vanessa called about an hour later. Her voice was rough from crying. She said the doctors were advising the family to prepare for the worst, and that Natalie had repeatedly asked whether anyone had contacted me. I asked which hospital. She was in the intensive care unit on the 4th floor of Denver Memorial. I told Vanessa I would let her know what I decided. For the rest of the night, I paced my cabin and argued with myself. Remaining in Montana would protect the life I had built and keep me from being pulled back into a relationship that no longer existed. Going to Denver might invite expectations from Natalie's family, or create hope I could not fulfill. But if she died while asking for me and I chose not to appear, the unfinished ending might follow me for the rest of my life. By morning, I understood that I was not returning as her husband. I was going, because closure required a final act of honesty. I booked a flight instead of driving because it was faster, and left Brooke a note saying I was handling a personal matter in Denver and expected to return in 3 days. During the flight, I set strict boundaries for myself. I would visit, say what needed to be said, and come home. The purpose was not reconciliation. It was a clean and controlled goodbye. Vanessa met me near the hospital entrance with a face pale from exhaustion. Although we had never been especially close, she embraced me tightly and thanked me for coming. She explained that Natalie had internal bleeding, a collapsed lung, and a spinal injury. 2 surgeries had already been completed, and the medical team was still uncertain about the outcome. Natalie was conscious at times, but heavily medicated and might not recognize me. I followed Vanessa to the intensive care unit while preparing myself for the worst. The woman in the bed barely resembled the person who had stood in the Montana snow. Bruising covered much of her face, one eye was swollen shut, and tubes, monitors, and wires surrounded her. Every mechanical sound emphasized how fragile her condition was. I sat beside the bed and looked at her uninjured hand resting open on the sheet. After a moment, I touched my fingers to hers. Her visible eye opened slowly. Recognition came through the medication. "Ethan," she whispered. "You came." I told her I had. She admitted she had not believed I would. I said I needed closure. Even then, a faint smile reached her cracked lips. "Always honest," she murmured. I stayed through the afternoon. I did not pretend we were reconciled, but I held her hand when she was awake and gave her the human contact she clearly needed. When the doctors arrived for evening rounds, I stepped into the waiting area and asked Vanessa to speak with me. I told her I would return to Montana the next morning and could not become part of Natalie's long-term recovery. Vanessa immediately protested that Natalie needed me and that loved ones could help a patient remain motivated. I answered that I was no longer Natalie's partner. That relationship ended when she chose Grant and maintained the affair for 4 months. Vanessa's exhaustion turned briefly into anger. "So you're going to leave while she might be dying?" she asked. I told her I was not responsible for the outcome of Natalie's treatment. I had come to say goodbye properly, and that was all I could honestly offer. Vanessa insisted that Natalie still loved me. I said that was unfortunate for Natalie, but did not recreate an obligation for me. Vanessa stared, as if she no longer recognized the man she remembered, and said I had changed. I did not deny it. Surviving the betrayal had made me harder, but it had also taught me that compassion and responsibility were not the same thing. When I returned to Natalie's room, she was awake and watching the doorway. "You're leaving," she said before I sat down. I told her I would go in the morning. She nodded carefully and said she understood. I asked whether she truly did. Her answer was simple. I had rebuilt my life, and she no longer had a place in it. She did not want me to remain because I felt guilty or afraid she might die. I told her that was good, because pity would not keep me there. Natalie studied me through her uninjured eye and said there was something harder in me now. I replied that I had needed hardness to survive what happened. She apologized again for everything. I told her I believed she was sorry, but remorse did not reverse the choices or restore the marriage. After a pause, she asked whether I had read the journal she had left for me at the cabin. I said not yet. She asked me to read it when I was ready, not as an excuse for what she had done, but as an explanation of the person she had become during those months. I agreed that I would eventually. Natalie then asked whether I still had my grandfather's watch, the one I took when I left Denver. The question surprised me, but I confirmed that I carried it. She looked relieved and said my grandfather would have been proud of the man I had become. The comment reached a place in me I had kept guarded. My grandfather had been disciplined, principled, and unwilling to compromise what he believed was right. The watch was the last important thing he gave me before his death. Natalie gestured weakly toward the cabinet beside her bed and told me there was something in the top drawer. Inside, I found a manila envelope with my name written across it. She asked me not to open it until I was home. I slipped it into my jacket. Then I told her she needed to rest. Before I reached the door, she asked whether she would see me again before my flight. I considered offering a comforting lie, but that would have served neither of us. "No," I said. "This is goodbye, Natalie." A single tear moved from the corner of her open eye. She thanked me for coming at all and repeated the same request she had made in Montana. "Be happy. You deserve it." I told her to take care of herself and walked out without looking back. Vanessa watched me leave with accusation in her expression, but I did not stop to defend a boundary she was too frightened and exhausted to understand. Later that night, in a hotel room near the airport, I opened the envelope. It contained property transfer documents for a small cabin on 10 acres near Estes Park. According to the deed, Natalie had purchased the property 6 months earlier and had arranged to transfer ownership to me. A short note was clipped to the paperwork. She explained that the cabin had originally been intended as a peace offering if she found me, somewhere quiet where I could write and live away from the pressure of my former life. After the accident, she wanted me to have it without conditions. I could accept it, sell it, ignore it, or never speak to her again. The realtor held the keys. I stared at the documents for a long time. Accepting the property could be interpreted as allowing Natalie to remain connected to me. Refusing it might feel morally cleaner, but the cabin represented real financial security and a private place that could serve a practical purpose. I decided not to make the choice emotionally. I kept the papers and would determine later whether to retain or sell the property. Whatever I chose would be mine, not a promise to her. My flight left early the following morning. I did not return to the hospital or call Vanessa. Some endings become less honest when people add another farewell, simply because the first one hurts. Brooke met me at the small Kalispell airport, leaning against her truck. She welcomed me back without demanding details and asked whether the matter had been handled. I told her it had, permanently. As we drove toward the lodge, she said I looked lighter. I explained that I had made necessary decisions about my former marriage and about the direction of my future. Brooke nodded, seeming to understand the difference. Then she mentioned an instructor position opening at the Mountain Rescue Training Center near Whitefish. The director was an old friend of hers, and she believed my firefighting experience, wilderness knowledge, and calm under pressure made me a strong candidate. The work offered better pay, professional advancement, and responsibilities that matched the skills I had spent years developing. The center wanted someone who could begin the following month. Brooke asked, carefully, whether I intended to remain in Montana. I told her I did. Her smile was immediate. She said she would hate to lose her best survival instructor. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask whether that was all she would hate to lose. Brooke's surprise lasted only a second before she recovered. That depends on what is being offered, she said. I invited her to dinner that night, just the two of us. She pretended to consider the proposal, although the color in her cheeks gave away her answer. As we drove through the snow-covered landscape, I felt something I had not permitted myself to feel for almost a year. Possibility. It was not the possibility of restoring what Natalie and I had destroyed. It was the possibility of building something different, on clearer boundaries and stronger foundations. 2 weeks later, Vanessa sent a brief message, saying Natalie had left critical condition. The recovery would be long, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic. I read the message once, felt genuine relief that she would live, and then deleted it without replying. That chapter was closed. On the same day, I accepted the position at the Mountain Rescue Training Center and signed the documents accepting ownership of the Estes Park cabin. I did not treat the property as a bond between Natalie and me. It was an asset legally transferred without conditions, and I would use or sell it according to my own judgment. That evening, Brooke and I hiked to a ridge overlooking Flathead Lake. The sunset spread across the frozen surface while we stood close enough for our shoulders to touch. She called the view beautiful. I answered that a new perspective could change everything, and we both understood I was not speaking only about the landscape. Brooke turned toward me and asked whether this was truly what I wanted, without ghosts from the old marriage standing between us. I considered the question seriously before answering. I had faced the past, heard Natalie's explanation, saved her life when she was in danger, said goodbye when she was injured, and refused to confuse compassion with reconciliation. I was not free because I had stopped caring. I was free because caring no longer controlled my decisions. This is the life I chose, I told Brooke. Not the life left over after I lost the other one. She smiled and said she could work with that. When the last light disappeared behind the mountains, the remaining weight of my former life seemed to lift with it. I had vanished once, because staying would have destroyed me. Now I was allowing myself to reappear by choice, clearer, stronger, and finally living on my own terms. That was not the life I had planned, but it was mine, and it was enough.